Shortly after I took office, I presented an executive budget that Jay and I worked up, and it showed a $2 billion deficit and what the cuts would look like had that gone into effect. And in fact, if you will recall, there was only $570 million for all of higher education if we had to do that. Knowing that that wasn't in the state's best interest, we went into a first special session, followed by a 3-month regular session, and then recently, as of midnight last Thursday night, concluded our second special session. And as a result of the work that we've undertaken, and certainly it involves raising revenue as well, funding for higher education, with the $58 million that was appropriated in the second special session, we're talking about less than 1% cut to higher education. I just want you to think about that and how far we came in such a short period of time. Because one of the things that we have to do as a state is stabilize our state support for higher education. Having led the nation in terms of our disinvestment in higher education over the previous 8 years, and the corresponding increases in tuition, which likewise led the nation over that same time period, it was critically important that we stabilize, that we show a commitment to higher education. We have been able to do that under very, very difficult circumstances. So I want to thank all of you for your work alongside the administration with members of the legislature to make this possible. And it's not just that the $2 billion in deficit didn't happen. The fact of the matter is spending for higher education will basically be flat, which is in most years not something to be terribly excited about. But I think all of you would acknowledge that had we discussed the possibility of flat funding for higher education just as few weeks ago, we'd all said, yeah, we'll sign up for that, we'll take it. But I don't want you to think the state is not going to undertake some significant and painful cuts. We will. There will be more than $320 million of cuts for the fiscal year starting July 1st. But we're not going to visit those cuts on higher education. And that's the good news, and that's what I wanted to celebrate with you all tonight. And of course, we have some other decisions that we have to make with respect to some language that was put into the supplemental appropriations bill about whether we're going to front load TOPS and whether we're going to go ahead now and through contingent appropriations account for any excess revenue that may come in beyond what REC has recognized. So while we can all agree the funding is not where it should be obvious to everyone that higher education really is the priority that I said it would be as governor. And I'm happy to be here talking about stabilizing state support for higher education. I would also ask that because we have done that, we need to see zero or minimal increases in tuition this year. We cannot continue to put more and more of the burden on our students and on their families through tuition, which is what happened through those annual double-digit tuition increases we've had for years. Didn't just put burden on the students, put burden on the state, because that's what ran up the cost of the TOPS program to where it's $300 million a year to fully fund it. And so I would ask for your assistance and the assistance of all the people behind me this year. We need to have minimal tuition increases, and I think we've already heard from some systems that they plan on no tuition increases, and I'm very happy to hear that. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that we've been put on notice by our economist for the state, Dr. Richardson. We could have as much as a $200 million shortfall in the current year that gets rolled into next year and has to be paid. And so we have to prepare for that. And if you have 12 months to prepare, or the longer you have to prepare for that, and you could spread any reduction that might happen over 12 months, the easier it is to digest it. And so I've already instructed Jay, and I don't know whether y'all have been able to hear me all this time. Okay. I've already met with Jay, and we are going to be making sure that executive branch agencies from the very first of the year, from July 1st, are preparing to run their operations on 95% of the general fund that we are going to be giving to them for their budgets. And I would encourage you all to do something similar. And I just think it's prudent, knowing that we are likely to have this shortfall, and we're going to have to make it up very quickly next year, that you join us in that effort. I read it in the paper this morning, we are not talking about reducing the TOPS appropriation at all for this. So I'm not sure where that came from. I'm not calling upon you all to do anything of that nature. Now, you all are here today to talk about a funding formula for higher education. The one thing that I'm confident of, the input into that formula in terms of the state general fund that we are appropriating for higher education is much higher than most people thought it would be. And so while there might be some disagreement around the edges about how the formula is going to work and whether universities remain whole or systems remain whole from year to year, the fact of the matter is we're talking about redistributing less than 1% of the budget. And I know that it's very difficult. I know that this is the first year that when by law you have to build in a performance component to the funding formula. Anytime that you are using a formula to either stand still or make cuts, it's very difficult. It would be much easier on you all to allocate additional dollars above a baseline and do it pursuant to a formula and get everyone on board. But I know that you all have been working extremely hard on this formula. Chairman Lipsey and I and the commissioner have been meeting on the formula in one form or another since December. So I know that you all have been actively working it. And I suspect that you're going to have a lot of input from the folks behind me today. I just know that where we are today, we're so much better than we thought we were going to be. And I hope the people behind me will take that into consideration too as they come forward and talk about the formula. One of the things that I think we've done that's pretty smart is we allow the systems to have 5% flexibility in the funding that comes to them through the formula, so that they can, at their level, to at least that degree, make some adjustments to account for problems that the formula may visit upon specific institutions. So I'm going to conclude my remarks there and then open it up for questions. But I did want to finish where I started, and that is by thanking you all for your hard work, for your commitment to the state of Louisiana, to our students, to our higher education systems and institutions, and let's make sure that this marks a new day in Louisiana where we actually prioritize what we say is a priority, and that's higher education, and specifically reinvesting state general fund dollars in higher education, minimizing tuition increases and the burden that we put onto families and to students. And let's look forward to next year, when the legislature is going to undertake comprehensive long-term structural tax reform that has to produce a revenue stream that is predictable, stable, and sufficient. And for those people who think that the votes that we've been casting since February the 14th of this year have been hard, I want you all to know next year is going to require much more courage. It's going to be much harder than what we did this year because the changes will be that much larger. So I would ask that you all remain engaged through between now and then. Look particularly to the task force that's been meeting and the recommendations that they're going to make. And when you have an opportunity to help with this process and position us for success in April, please take advantage of that opportunity by talking to your legislators, both in the House and the Senate, talking to different stakeholders around higher education, around business and industry, local government elected officials. We have to make this work. This is our one opportunity to truly stabilize our state so that we can move forward in a way where we can, over time, strategically reinvest in our critical priorities, and certainly that includes higher education. And hopefully we've demonstrated that we do prioritize higher education in the state of Louisiana based upon the minimal impact that you've had in terms of a reduced amount of state general fund.
Tell me a little bit about today's meeting. Well, today was really the culmination of a lot of months' worth of work, primarily to allocate the budgets for the next year to the systems, also to talk about revisiting how we allocate dollars for the chairs and professorships, as well as doing a lot of the things such as HB2 with respect to capital projects. So it was a good meeting.
And what were the main decisions made regarding the budget today?
Well, today, for the first time, we are allocating some of our dollars on an outcomes-based formula, which looks at things like retention and graduation rates. And Senator Appel's legislation required that, but we were able to implement that. So that caused some shifts in campus funding, but at the same time, we're trying to move toward the idea that we're trying to do things in a better way on behalf of our students, and retention rates and graduation rates are important. So that was probably the biggest thing that happened today.
What type of impact will students and people in the community see from this?
Well, I think probably it'll be pretty transparent. I mean, right now we had the funding that was relatively flat. So in other words, most institutions are able to do what they were supposed to do. As you well know, TOPS right now is still funded at 70%. So that's still the biggest concern in terms of how that will impact the number of students who both come back to campus and stay. So that's probably the bigger concern in the next couple of weeks.
And are there any ideas on how to address that concern?
Well, we'd like the legislature to put more money in there. I think that's the easiest idea. On the other hand, we're also working with campuses to try to identify perhaps some other ways that students can gain some funding. But again, once again, it's it's a shortfall of 30% basically, and so we have to find a way for the students to make that up.
All right, is there anything else you want to add today?
No, as I said, I think this is a good time. It was a tough 4 months, but I think at the end of the day, the governor just stepped up. It was a great higher education champion. Many of the legislators also recognize the role of higher ed, and we just need to keep going.